All right, we're live.
All
Hi,
right.
everyone.
Hello.
Yay. Well, it's Peter Rubin here with Gitanjali Hemp. Thank you so much for being here.
Yay, I'm so happy to be here with you.
Yeah, we're both checking in and sharing. We're both feeling a little bit funky this morning. And sometimes I think that's the energy of whatever we're going to discuss, sort of coming through us and waiting to be channeled and brought into form. So to give a little bit of context, my name is Peter Rubin. I'm one of the co-founders of the Racial Reconciliation Project. And I'm cooking up a course for white people, a 3-week intensive for white people called Heal Yourself First. Sorry, Free Yourself First. And it's all about healing and action and showing up as anti-racists in this really pivotal time that we're all in. So in preparation for this workshop series, I'm interviewing cool people with cool stuff to share. And I'm here with Gitanjali, who's a dear friend and mentor and teacher, and the founder of Syntara System. And, I actually struggle to describe Syntara System, even though I've been in the program for 3 years and learning it. And I love this language on your website, which I'd love to read. So Syntara System is a deeply integrative, evolutionary energy healing modality that allows you to come into direct, co-creative relationship with the unseen forces that shape our world, awakening you to an embodiment of the full potency of your being, bringing clarity, connection, and unshakable stability and joy. I love that, and it's so true.
Yay, I love hearing that through your mouth.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I'll share, briefly about this work is over these last 3 years, I've connected with a lot of other healers and visionaries. You're very much a teacher of teachers. And this modality is incredible in the scope of it. It's dealing with sort of our internal personal healing. It deals with relationships. It deals with community, with planetary issues, and even cosmic energies. So in the same healing session, we can be dealing with, some wound we have from our upbringing, and also connecting with star systems and the planet, all in a way that's very much yours. It's a modality you've birthed through your own journey, your own intuition and insights. I hear it has a lot in common with Taoism and other ancient practices, but it's not within a particular lineage, which is really cool. It's really compatible with anyone's spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs or whatever people are bringing. And I found it sort of like, I guess MSG is out of favor, but it's sort of like MSG for everything else. It's allowed me to like spice up my coaching and my change work that I do. And it's really become both a spice and a foundation, to mix some metaphors for my work in the world. So happy to be here. Also mentioned you're a mother. So a mother, business owner, mystic. You wear a lot of different hats with a lot of grace. So thank you for modeling that and having this conversation with me about the energetics of social change. So anything you want to add about, just to give context before we dive in?
I don't think so. I love hearing all that you share, the way you frame things in your wonderful, succinct, and grounded way. I'm grateful to be here. I guess if there was one thing I would add is that what I most love about doing the work is really helping and supporting all of these different people integrate it into their world and work and view and life, and how the ripples of the shifts that can create in the world can happen. And so I'm so grateful to be here with you and love the work that you're doing in the world, and wanting to support this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So let's start with this time we're in, these crazy times we're in. And you hear everyone making comments about COVID and this racial reckoning that we're part of. And to be honest, I find yours particularly insightful. And you've been talking about these times for ages now. So could you give an energetic perspective of what you see happening and some of the different levels and layers of what you're tuned into?
Yeah, there's a few different ways, and you can bring me back if I start to get tangenty. But I think that humanity, we're in an evolutionary cycle right now, in a leap moment of shift and change. And I think we can't continue functioning in the ways that we have in the past. I don't think it's sustainable for humans ourselves or for the planet. And we know this, we can see this in a lot of different ways. And so I think there's a lot of different stressors that are arising to help us shift and change. And the way I've been framing that is that when we look at things from an energetic perspective, there's oftentimes this paradox that's happening. And this is sometimes hard for our minds to get or understand. And so in the most recent past, the way I've been framing it is that there's really in the energy this tremendous liberatory current that's flowing through. There's this beautiful, undulating, shimmering energy that's bringing coherence to everything it touches. And meanwhile, on the ground, when that arrives, what we feel is an illumination of everything that's not liberated within us, within our ancestral fields, within our history, within our relationships, within our structures and systems in the world. And so it's this paradox. So I think what we're actually being offered is this tremendous capacity for living and moving and being in a really liberated way beyond what we've ever understood before, with more harmony and grace and coherence with one another. And it flies in the face of a lot of what we already have created in our own psyches and in our world. And that interface is really uncomfortable. And so we see that as Black Lives Matter, and seeing the historical context of what we've done to one another. And what we've experienced, and those wounds all need to be tended to in order for this current to land. And so, there's a way that there's this real unity in framing it in this way, because it's like we're all in the same stew, we're all experiencing the same energetic. And if we can learn how to do that well together, something really beautiful can be birthed. And when we stay stuck in a certain vantage point and just feel our own identity and start fighting with each other and blaming each other in the various ways that we're all doing that, it just creates more hardship and more constriction. But if we could really feel and embrace the beauty of what's actually coming in and what's possible, and find ways to integrate that together as a whole and as a collective, I think we could have really, to not be super new agey or whatever, but it could be a dawn of a new era, a really beautiful, sustainable, just life and world. Yeah. So I hope that we do that with as little suffering as possible. We find our way to that.
Yeah, there's so much in there we could unpack. I just want to name a few dynamics. One is this idea that there are less dense energies, more abstract energies that are descending. That's a new framing since I've known you. And it makes a lot of sense to me. So our tangible bodies, the physical world, it has a lot of density to it, a lot of momentum, a lot of stuckness sometimes in the structures that exist. And this idea that, in Syntara, I believe, is a word you made up from this, using the root of from the stars.
With the stars.
With the stars. Yeah. And that's a feeling, there's something that's coming in. Again, I can't explain it. And as this energy is coming into greater density, we're able to tune into it and feel it. And stuff gets churned and stirred up. And I've only heard you speak of a liberatory current recently. So it seems like a specific configuration of energy that's not just about social justice liberation. It's a broader or more abstract concept that includes our own liberation, stepping into our own true natures. Could you say more about that energy?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One thing is also to just say that it's really a continuum in the way that I would frame it. There's a way as an energy worker, you go to a chiropractor, it's all about the bones, and you go to a neurologist, it's all about we'll each frame it. We'll all frame things based on our worldview. And for me as an energy worker, I would say energy precedes form. Anything that's in form began as energy first, and then kind of condensed into form in our manifest reality. And so one way or another, liberation's coming. That's the first thing that I would say. If that's in the current and that's what's arriving, it's going to come with or without us. Is one thing that I would say. And with us, what that can look like as we digest it, as we integrate it, what can that look like? It looks like a release of abstract conditioning. you look at almost any spiritual path, one of the primary things and teachings is that we begin to shed, any mystical spiritual path, is that we need to begin to shed our conditions, the conditioned understanding of our life and reality that we get from the context of our culture and our family upbringing. And it's not that there's not some things that are useful there, there definitely are, in allowing a species and a culture to continue and to grow, but there's also things that limit and bind. And so there's a way of looking at an expression of ideas, of thoughts, of reality, like, so the things that we build in our businesses are constructs that can either be allowing for greater expression and fullness of the uniqueness of each individual, or they can be beginning to shut down and make rigid and atrophy and make small the life force of people. And in the worldview that I hold, we've kind of gotten to a place where our culture has become like a monocropped garden, not even garden, like, you know, industrial agriculture. And it's not the most sustainable thing. And we can know this in some very tangible ways. It depletes the soil, it wastes water, it creates massive areas of, you know, dead zones over time. And the places that are more healthy in an ecosystem are places where there's a lot of diversity. And so I see this in any group of people coming together, and in us as individuals as well. Some of us are more like redwood trees and some of us are more like ferns, and it's not to compare one to the other. And the redwood tree provides for the fern and the fern provides for the redwood tree. And so it's really that this is the piece, this liberatory current liberates us not to all have the same thing or be the same thing or do the same thing. It liberates us to find what is truly authentic for each of us, and to trust that if we each do that, there's more than enough for everyone, and that what we offer will provide and what we receive will be part of a greater cycle that is healthy for all. And so, you know, even in speaking about that, there's so much that's conditioned around our desire nature. We think we want things that we don't actually want. We, you know, we're taught to want things that we don't actually want, and we're also taught not to want things that we actually want. And so even just within that, there's liberation that needs to occur.
I love that framing so much. It's not just hopeful. I think it is hopeful and optimistic, but more than that, it gives context for why it's so hard right now. You know, I think if it were as hard as it is, and I didn't have that context, I would just be in despair. But you're basically framing it as a healing crisis, saying that this good thing is coming. It's coming. And it's cooking us, and it's cooking away, burning away any of that karma, any of that conditioning that's not serving this template. It's really a template you're describing of a more beautiful, ecologically, you know, sustainable world.
Yeah.
And you raised a good point about sort of, we can fight it and we can do this gracefully and as a team, or we can it can be terrible. And you know, we have these conversations every other Monday, these check-ins, which are immensely helpful. And last time I'll share, I brought some relationships where I was really rigid and feeling offended by, you know, my friends' viewpoints, and you helped me come into a different relationship where they're right and there's room for their truth and my truth, and we can hold more perspectives and do it while seeing each other's humanity, seeing the wounds that shape, you know, why we get rigid and why we get stuck in these limiting viewpoints. Could you speak more to how you hope we can show up for each other?
Yeah, I mean, even just within you bringing that example to the table, like what I would continue to say about that is, when you did that, what happened? Do you want to share? Like what happened when you were able to not be rigid, but actually allow them the space? Yeah.
So I'll share, once I made that shift, I had a couple miracles happen. A friend of mine who's I thought was quite conservative and not open to anti-racist conversations, ended up, I had an open-minded conversation with him where he was talking about intersectionality. He was bringing concepts I had no idea that he bought into. And it was a rich, loving, connected affirmation of our friendship. And I have no rational explanation for how that shifted so abruptly.
Yeah.
And then someone else, I was having a big argument around COVID and what precautions we should be taking in our connection. He went from completely averse to taking those precautions to open, uncomfortable, but open to do that. What can I say? And it really just had to do with me getting in alignment with my own, I guess, my desire nature and what my truth is, and also an openness to holding the humanity of the situation.
Yeah, and open to their desire nature and their truth in the moment. And we say this a lot in many different ways when we're talking in this work. There's these rigid, it goes to the consciousness states that we talked about talking about, but there can be this rigidity. If we hold ourselves in a certain way against a certain idea or ideal in the world, we're freezing both of them in place. And if we can soften and open, not to say that that worldview is okay and we agree with it completely, but just that it exists, because it does.
Yeah.
And get current with ourselves in some way, it allows for a mutability. We go back into that energetic context. We're not fixing the point in time. We're actually allowing the wave to return to a wave state. We allow it to begin to shift. We allow the other person to change. We allow ourselves to change. By allowing ourselves to be impacted and change, we allow them to change as well. And something new can emerge out of the mystery, out of the emptiness, out of the void. Something new can come into being. And the piece that we say a lot in the model is we'll talk about there's very little that's like bad and wrong. There's distortion in the energy field, and there's a million reasons for distortion. I almost don't believe in pure badness. I mean, I'm not quite sure at the farthest outreach and edge, but I don't, or evil or whatever else it is. There's distortion. There's love and a distortion of that love. That's a Sufi teaching, right? And so when we hold something in a fixed state, we hold the distortion in place. And when we allow a return to flow in ourselves, we offer the opportunity for a return to flow in them. And generally, lack of distortion is what ensues. Flow returns. And in that, we come into our natural state. And from that place, there tends to be people are good-natured and good-hearted in general. Yeah.
And it helps to hold that and give people the opportunity to step into that, whether or not they choose to.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So let's talk about the consciousness states. I remember a conversation we had with our class about these 4 states of consciousness, which existed as a model before applying it to social change. But we talked about it in the context of activism and change work, and it really helped me understand some of the patterns that were happening. From a more of a zoomed out perspective. So could you run us through the 4 states and then help us apply it?
Yeah. So the 4 states are, foundational in the work, and it can be applied to anything. And so in this context, we would say the 4 states, just really quickly, and they're not archetypes, and it's a continuum. They're fluid, is victim, warrior, manifestor, and creator. And so each of them kind of have a shadow and an action and a way of moving, and they have a way to get into flow, to return to flow. So we actually don't, in our model, want to create a hierarchy in any of them. But so victim in a shadow sense is the wound. It's our wounded places where we are at the whim of the world around us and we're victimized by it. And then when we go to warrior, we begin to interface directly with the world around us, and we kind of come head to head with it. And there's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of volition there, and it can feel like an empowered place. And we see this a lot in the activist world, and it's really important for us to all be comfortable with that confrontational energy on some level. But if we stay there, it's like a standoff, and it's incredibly depleting. A system can't stay in warrior for extended periods of time and stay healthy. It starts to break down. And so then we move to manifestor state, and the manifestor state is kind of like where we're kind of at choice, at least in one thread of our life. We're at choice with what we want to create, how we want to live, what we want to do. And what happens here, the shadow of this place, is if we atrophy and get stuck there, we don't continue to integrate other aspects of our wound and step more into our power and authority. We kind of sit there, and it's kind of the place that we've come to popularize as spiritual bypass. We sit there and we're not comfortable anymore with our own wounded places, and we certainly don't want to hear about yours.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this, and what happens though is that there is a rigidity and an atrophying that happens, that greater growth and evolution and development gets frozen and stuck. We can only manifest so much from that limited perspective and place. And so then we talk about moving into the creator consciousness place, and that is really when we begin to comfortably oscillate amongst the different spaces. So we live our life, we are going to continue to get impacted by things. We receive them in a victim state. We receive the world without fear as we grow, as we evolve. We feel the feelings that are there. We confront and meet them and begin to choose what we're going to do about that. And then we do it again. And then we do it again. And in this way, thread by thread, we bring more of ourself current. We bring more of ourself to the table. And over time, we don't only bring more of ourselves to the table, we bring more of the world to the table. We, in that way also, of how you were able to hold space with your friends in that way, you've been doing this work for quite some time too. And so there's a way that your system being able to oscillate in that way, take in the feeling of being victimized by the relationship and concerned about how these people were behaving in some way, feeling the feelings all the way, allowing yourself to confront it, not in a confrontational way, but to confront it within yourself and to confront them in a loving way, in a caring way, in a curious way, and to allow a space for them to change. And so when we get into this creator state, when we're moving and flowing in this way, other things in our life tend to as well. And so I think this is part of the evolution that we're going through. The capacity to be with multiple states and phases of being an experience in ourselves, and the multiplicity of experiences and perspectives in others, and allowing it all to continue to move and shift and change. And it's a lot to ask, because in the past and historically, we are conditioned as humans, I think, to be more fixed. And for things to move more slowly. And right now things are moving very quickly. Yeah. And there's very little that's fixed. And that can be just hard on the nervous system.
Tell me about it. I find that model so profound. I've heard it so many times now from you, but each time it sinks a little bit more deeply, just into my bones and my understanding. And I guess for me, one thing you said, it's not a hierarchy. That's mind-blowing, because I came into this work thinking that it's not good to be a victim. It's better to be a warrior, and even better still to be a manifester. And once you're a manifester, that's the ultimate, right? So this idea that there's a stage after that, which is to cycle through all of them, and then that's actually ideal, really opens up a lot of possibility. And this idea that the victim is where we met the world. Our infant selves at the whim of our parents and conditioning. We need to go back there to those younger parts of ourselves that were, in a sense, victimized by life, not in a judgmental way, but there's our compassion, our empathy, our wisdom comes from there. And then when you talk about warrior, I think about the archetypes of the burned out activist, right? Who's just going, pushing. And getting stuck in warrior that way is not sustainable. And then in the manifester, I hear, the image I have is sort of the white spiritual leader or entrepreneur who doesn't want to look at any of this stuff. I'm happy, I'm vibrating at a high level, and there's that pushing away, almost a violence of pushing away any of those lower states. So as we disrupt the whole hierarchy of that and learn to appreciate and flow between these states, I think it just makes us more flexible and gives us access to more resource.
Yeah, I want to just, as you're saying that, a few things occur to me. One of them is there is a spiral quality in the sense of when we return to victim, as we stabilize more and more manifester, there's a developmental place that's important to be able to do. And then going back into victim, it's kind of like so many spiritual traditions will talk about a return to innocence. And the victim is the wound, and it's also this innocence. It's this place of being humble, of knowing that we're still at the whims of things that are greater than us, that a new karmic load will come to our shore to be digested and integrated as only we can, that's a gift to us in some way. And that really is our humanity. And it's true, it's where our initial attachment pieces come in and our conditioning comes in that victim state. but that there's innocence and beauty, and it's how we actually connect and engage with each other in the world. We don't do that very well from a manifestor state. We have a distance in a certain way, and that's beautiful too. We need both, the oscillation, for sure. Yeah, and yeah.
So humility and prayer. Prayer is also something that comes from that victim state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So actually, you talked about nervous systems and this being a hard time on our nervous systems, which I just, briefly concurred. Could you talk about what's helpful these days for you and for your students in terms of finding resource and finding stability when it seems intense? And what I've heard you say is that it's not going to get less intense.
Yeah.
Based on your astrology or whatever forces you tune into, you've been sort of warning us that the next few years are likely to be, more rather than less. So what can we do to stay stable and stay resourced?
Yeah, I've been talking, like, as you've said several times, I've been talking about this for a long time. And, a couple years ago, and when you first started the program, there was definitely, I was like, it's just going to get more intense. And even as I would say it, I'd be like, what can that possibly mean? And then it'd show up and it's only going to get more intense and like geometrically more so. And I really felt that last summer and last fall, and not knowing what was coming, but just feeling like, who could have ever imagined, and getting guidance in different ways in my business and in my life, and not understanding, but kind of following through, but with a lot of doubt in my own mind, and then seeing what happens and realizing like, oh, now it makes sense. And if I extrapolate that to some of the things I'm feeling now, I think it's going to be extremely intense in the next 6 months, in the next year here. I don't know what that's going to look like, or I'm not going to try to guess. And I would say that in 4 years, we'll start seeing a little bit of something different. In 10 years, we'll start to be landed in something new, whatever that is, whatever choices we each individually and collectively make. So I think we're in a big turning, and we'll see how that goes. And so this is my roundabout way of answering your question about the nervous system.
And I just want to interrupt there. When you say 4 or 10 years, could you share where that comes from?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say. I mean, I definitely, astrology is one of the things I look at, but not as a typical astrologer, and I don't get really heady, and I don't know the exact cycles. As you know, in the model, we really connect to energies through direct experience, and I receive transmission directly. I mean, this is so out there and out of the box. I don't usually put this out in the public face of things. I usually wait more deeper in.
Thanks for taking a risk with me. My friends are weird, so hopefully we have some open-minded, weird viewers here.
Direct transmission directly from planets and from stars, that we can actually, just like you can sit with a tree and kind of feel a relative understanding. It settles your system in some way. It helps you feel more grounded. Sometimes it can help you feel more stable. You can sit with the ocean and feel a depth in yourself, a stillness from the deeps of the sea, and something, the breeze will come and it will speak to you in some way that we're contextualized by all of these things, and we are contextualized by the greater planetary bodies. I mean, the moon moves all the waters on the planet. It pulls the cycles of our female bodies, and that the other planets do as well, the planetary bodies. And so to sit with them and to feel what is the communication that's occurring at any time. So the astrology is on some level one piece of it, but there's also just a way that connecting into direct knowing and direct relationship, and that at some point over time you can start feeling those things. And that's a lot what we teach and train in the system and in the model. That's what we're doing.
So it sounds like it's for you, it's visual, it's kinesthetic, it's through direct relationship with different aspects of life. It sounds shamanic, what you're describing. I don't know if that's an appropriate label, but that's what comes to me, thinking about sort of directly having these unmediated experiences with the world and the cosmos, and learning from that.
Yeah, and people would say I'm shamanically trained, or I'm working in shamanic arts, or whatever else. I don't like the word particularly, because I mean, that is just where it comes from and what it's used for. It's not even from the same cultures, and indigenous cultures all over the planet have different relationships, direct relationship to the natural world. So, I mean, I think it's just being human
Yeah.
if we were, the fullness. And so this is where we come with a lot of our marketing language. It doesn't make sense until after you're deeper in the program, but basically saying a return to the fullness of what it means to be human, what it means to be a human being, recontextualized.
Yeah, I had the most interesting conversation with a client yesterday. So most of my
Mhm.
clients are men who are pretty in their heads. This is a friend of mine from Stanford who I'm working with. And both have an engineering degree. He has a computer science degree. So that's where we came from. And in this session, he came more expanded than he ever has been. Um, really curious and open to these ideas about synchronicity and stuff beyond what our culture would say is real.
Mhm.
I was sharing a story of one of my best friends is a midwife, and she's also my ex-fiance. So when we were together, she would be at a birth, and I'd be home in bed, and I'd be feeling a lot.
Mhm.
And there was this one time when I started writing down, just out of curiosity, because this has happened so many times, I'd write down the time and what I was feeling. So 12:32 a.m. terror and panic, 12:35 relief, and we looked at the birth chart and looked at my log, and almost minute for minute the two corresponded. Where the mom hemorrhaged, I was in a panic. She stopped the bleeding, I felt better. Right? And you could say that's unbelievable or dismiss it as improbable, but really what I think of it as is a deep sensitivity and an attunement to her, because we were in an intimate relationship and I'd been doing this sort of work. And that sensitivity is what we all have that you're speaking to. I mean, you've been on a mystical path your whole life, but we all have that inherent sensitivity and connection to each other and what's happening around us. So
Yeah, somehow I really want to say this. My clients aren't all super spiritual. Like there's definitely people who come in from corporate world, and this is what I want to say about that is that so many times, I'd say 90% of my clients, at some point within the first or second session, when they come in, and students, they'll say something to me like, "I've never told anybody this. Not even my parents or my partner or my, whatever, whoever their people are." And then they'll tell me something that is like just really mystical
mm,
that they've been shamed out of being able to own about what happened to them when they were little, or what they saw or what they heard or what they experienced, or when someone died or something that happened for them that is totally outside of the box in the context of our current paradigm and culture. And that warms my heart that they feel comfortable to say it for no good reason. There's something in the context that they feel free, that makes me feel happy. And there's something that makes me really sad about that too. It makes me realize how much of our humanity has been severed from us,
mm-hmm.
and how much we don't allow these ways of knowing and experiencing reality. They're so meaningful to inform us, and not only inform us, but inform our creations, our organizations, our institutions, our ways of caring, our ways of teaching, our ways of sharing. And it really puts us at a loss. And it particularly puts those of us at a loss who constitutionally have a lot of that as our strength.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it really does connect with what's being asked right now as we dismantle patriarchy and dismantle this colonial capitalist mindset, which is all about putting things in boxes and shutting down some of these magical and tender dimensions of who we are. So I think there's something deeply revolutionary about this work that we're speaking to, and opening up our sensitivity and and what's possible.
Yeah, and there's an interesting thing here that I want to speak to in relationship to the current world conversation, is that there's this fine line where it's like we want to come into direct relationship to things so we don't have to be told how it is exactly, right? And so we see that. And then there's also the place of deconstructing our own internal conditioning that causes us to see things and frame things in a certain way. I can see a lot, I don't want to get super political or anything, but there's definitely a lot with, a lot of the conspiracy theories and things like that. I think there's half truths, partial truths, mixed truths, but what I see people doing with it a lot is core attachment wounding.
Mm,
How was authority for them when they were young, and then that's how they relate to it now, and there's these projections and these things. So it's a really delicate thing as we come into our own direct knowing to also do the deeper work of digesting and integrating our own unconscious distortions.
Mm.
And that's where the anti-racism work is so important.
Yeah, there's this idea that I've been with is like knowing that I'm wrong, but I need to keep moving forward as best I can, knowing that I'm making wrong assumptions. And not to get paralyzed, but to realize we are all distorted expressions of ourselves because we're part of a distorted culture and other reasons. So there's something deeply compassionate, but also not letting ourselves off the hook completely and saying, just because I think this means it's right and true. No, we have to be discerning as we keep moving. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the humility piece too. It's like being willing to present something and then being willing to be wrong, being willing to renegotiate without it making a whole collapse in the entirety of your system. And to know like that's part of what we're doing here. We're reorganizing, we are oscillating, we are repatterning, and we can only do that together by hearing other people's input and allowing that to change us and then showing up in a new way again. And to have that humility. So that's that consciousness state's oscillation again, to be willing to be changed and transformed, to be willing to face up in warrior state and do the work and reorganize and show up again and try again until we find something that's more coherent together.
Yeah, so as I'm just looking at time, and as we close here, I would like to loop back to resourcing. And just, could you share something about how do we stay resourced? And I think it connects with being in our truth in some way. Right. So how do those two concepts connect for you? And what do you have to offer for someone who's just really having a hard time right now?
Oh my goodness, there's so much to say here, and it's a closing statement.
I know. Well, it could be a lengthy closing statement. Let's say that.
Well, I think the resource piece, there's a few different ways to look at it. There's one of the things is, again, getting into direct relationship with yourself in that moment is really important. We can have an idea of what would be resourceful to us and what has been in the past. And my sense is right now, that's not always truly what we need in the moment. And so really listening that what's resourceful in a moment might be taking a stand for something. What's resourceful in a moment might be not, and going and resting for a little while. What might be resourceful is connecting with community. What might be resourceful, starting to get to know ourselves better and feeling what is resourceful to our system by listening again, turning towards and listening directly to our system, taking your hand and your ears to the place that's feeling tired or exhausted or scared or hurt, and asking it what it needs and meeting that need as best as you can, or something that is close to it, like negotiating with it, with those places inside of ourselves. So I think that's one of the things. And I think that in that same way, following the cues of our own internal spaces in that way also leads us to deeper meaning and purpose in the world. And I think that stabilizes our nervous system. Us stepping into the truth of who we are stabilizes the current right now. That's what brings a harmony to the flow. If this liberatory current is coming into our system or moving through our system and it hits glitchy places, that is difficult for our system and our experience and expression in life. So if we turn towards the glitchy place and begin to smooth it out, the flow returns in that area. And when the flow returns, our nervous system settles. So living in our own alignment and in our own truth is going to be the most healing thing for us personally and collectively. And I think it's going to shake up a lot of who we think we are and what we think we're about. And we get to be humble and incredibly, I think, playful and joyful in the experience of that, even as we interface with some tremendous suffering that's occurring within and around us.
I love that. And I just think it's so different from what you might hear about self-care, right? And what I'm hearing is it really depends on the moment. And sometimes self-care is being full on in your purpose. And that's the thing that's going to help you settle. And that's what I've been finding. I feel better when I'm really in my purpose, even if some voices in my head, passive voices say, oh, that's too much, you should just rest. So.
Yeah. And I think there's also, just in saying that, there's also the place where it just goes again into the importance of the multiplicity. It's not the same thing for you in any moment. And it's not the same thing for me as it is for you, as it is for you. And allowing room for that diversity.
Wonderful. So as we close, I'd love to hear about what you're offering these days. I know for me the 2-year program was amazing, and there's some sort of smaller commitments that are possible for people who've resonated and want to get a sense of, more of what you offer and how you help.
Yeah, right now we have a 6-week online class that we're offering quarterly about, which is called the Evolutionary Leap. And it's the first module of the 2-year training, but it gives the foundational teachings for the work that can be applied to anything. It can be like really to your personal relationships, to work. A lot of people do it as therapists, as healers. A lot of people use it in organizational leadership and development and systems management, curriculum development, and for schools and for working with children. So yeah, that's the best way. And right now we're not offering a 2-year training because of the sheltering and not knowing, when in-person things can resume. But out of the 6-week course, we're offering a year-long, month-by-month deepening curriculum that goes into deeper applications of all different sorts. So
Amazing. Yeah, I send my friends your 6-week program and they're loving it. So
yay, I
yeah,
love it.
and it's really affordable too. So
It's really affordable.
yeah.
And we're committed to keeping it and making it affordable. So if you're having hardship of any sort, or you work with marginalized or at-risk communities, then we also offer scholarships. So just
Amazing.
yeah.
And where can people learn about that?
At syntarasystem.com, SYNTARASYSTEM.com, and it's in there somewhere. You'll find it.
Great. Yeah, and I'll put a link here in the Facebook Live. And on my end, we got this workshop, Free Yourself First, starting very soon, August 8th. And again, that's for white people who want a safe space and support to look at our conditioning and to get free using a lot of these principles that we described today. So that is with Galen Logan and Wanda Whitaker, and you can learn more at racialhealing.net. And enrollment is open for another week. And if you happen to watch this later, we'll have an interest list for the next round that this happens. So. Yay. I think that's all. Anything else before we close?
I don't think so. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah,
I'm so excited about the work you're doing, like so excited.
Thank you. Likewise. And just sending love and blessings to all of you watching. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. And if you have questions, we're both quite active on Facebook. So leave them in the comments and we'll be happy to engage there and see what you took away. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.